I had a hell of a reading month in September after a somewhat disappointing August. The average rating per book jumped from 3.6 to 4.3 month over month. Every single one of the 8 books that I read was solid or really good or just flat out elite. And today we're going to work through them from lowest to highest rated. But again, they're all good. So open your Goodreads, your wish list, whatever you got to do, because this is going to be all gas, no brakes. Yarami. And look, I mention it every time I do a video, but check out my community on Bindery. There's a free to join follower tier where you can get my dynamic bookshelf and access to other announcements like how we're coming along with my publishing imprint, Kissed Reads. We are publishing our first book, by the way. We even have a brand new logo, and our first book has a new title, which is A Complement of Scoundrels by S.V. Lockwood. So much progress has been made, but there's still so much left to do. And our target release is fall of 2026, so we got to get on it. And the support of my Bindery community is what funds that project directly. So please consider checking it out. And yeah, other than that, if you're liking the content here and you're feeling generous, click the like button, sub to the channel, tell a friend, and leave a comment about the best book that you read in September. I want to know. All right, without any further ado, 8 certified fresh book reviews spanning a wide range of genres coming your way. Let's boogie. Let's start things out with a wild card because despite my former career being in sports media, I don't really talk about sports books. I made an exception for Turf Wars, The Fight for the Soul of America's Game by DeMaurice Smith, who is the former executive director of the NFL Players Association. Smith was elected to this role in 2009 and remained there until 2023. And while I was reading this, I was just kind of blown away by how many big events that Smith oversaw in his role. You had Bountygate and Deflategate, which anything ending in gate is never good. He was involved in the uncapped year of 2010, where the owners made an illegal super secret salary cap. Many of them violated that. There's the 2011 lockout, a new collective bargaining agreement that same year, the player safety reforms in which concussion protocol was a big feature. Another CBA in 2020, how the league dealt with COVID, the anthem protests and social justice initiatives, and fighting back against disciplinary actions brought on by the league policy violations. That there's so much meat on the bone. And I haven't even mentioned the drama surrounding his initial election process where Troy Vincent was trying to rally support to his side and undermine Smith. And there is a lot of juicy stuff that goes on there, and Smith delves into all of that. There are so many fascinating interactions that play out here, whether it's with players, owners, or the league commissioner, Roger Goodell, who is effectively a meat shield for these childish tycoon billionaire bullies. And Smith really takes the owners to task for their stubbornness as he details how they in the league have carefully crafted this narrative that the billionaire owners are the good guys, the players are the spoiled bad guys, they're just lucky to play the game. And they use every tool in their vast toolbox, including politicians and reporters, to sell the public this extremely flawed, hypocritical, and one-sided story. And regarding the reporters doing the league's bidding, it's so clear who is marching to their tune because they don't want to lose any of the access. I mean, go through any of their X accounts and ask yourself, who does this tweet serve? Who could have written this? And it's very clear how many soulless people there are in that business. And there are more than a few examples where Smith highlights this. So while I wasn't surprised by a whole lot of this, I knew Roger Goodell is a good soldier, trotted out to face public scorn. So powerful owners like Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones don't get hit with the tomatoes. That's not revelatory, but the behind the scenes peek at how all of that plays out was fascinating. I think this book is at its best when it sticks to the facts. The passionate rhetoric, while understandable, can feel out of place at times because I think a lot of his points stood on their own without it. But again, this is what Smith went through, and I don't fault him for caring that much about it to any degree. I gave it 3 3/4 stars. It's a really solid piece of business with a ton of insight into a sport that a lot of times serves as a microcosm for what's happening in America, and I would recommend this overall. Another book that earned 3 3/4 stars was Alexander at the End of the World, The Forgotten Years of Alexander the Great by Rachel Kauser. I read this as a refresher for Ghost on the Throne, which was the History Sickos book club pick for September. I'll talk about that later. And this got the job done. While most books on Alexander focus on the earlier campaigns, This one shifted the focus to his time beyond the conquest of Persia. So you're going to go from the eastern borderlands of the Persian Empire into places like the Hindu Kush, modern Afghanistan, parts of Pakistan, and the Indian subcontinent before you get back to Babylon, where Alexander met his end. Now, if you've read something fairly comprehensive like Philip and Alexander by Adrian Goldsworthy, I don't think this offers much that is new, but it does offer some insight into alternate theories about why Alexander acted the way he did in some cases, and it does argue those points well, because Alexander is often held up as like this textbook case of absolute power corrupting absolutely, and there's credence to that. But our author here kind of kicks back against that theory, which I found interesting. And overall, Alexander's story is a fascinating one due to his accomplishments and the detective work that's required to separate legend from reality. Kauser does leverage some more modern archaeology to accentuate this piece. So while being yet another book about Alexander in a sea of books about Alexander, this one did still hold its own. For this next one, I'll be honest, I consume most of my political analysis outside of books, recently anyway, but I did get a lot out of Identity Crisis, the 2016 presidential campaign, and The Battle for the Meaning of America by a trio of authors. And I did a lot of digging before picking this one up because I wanted something as close to neutral as you could get, something only interested in the facts and data and what it could tell us about the election and voting public. And I understand that is a nearly impossible task, but this, I felt anyway, was close to the mark as you could get. So I will applaud the collection of authors here for meeting that difficult standard within the realms of possibility. This is a nuanced, well-argued, analytical work that uses data to mostly come to reasonable conclusions. This is broken up into 4 parts. You start with the Republican primaries, followed by the Democratic primaries, and then the presidential election, and then like post-mortem after that. What I found interesting was how Trump tapped into what was important to Republican voters that hadn't really been at the core of Republican messaging. For instance, the voters' economic liberalism regarding entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicaid. This also articulated really well how Teflon Don really wasn't that untouchable and benefited from the slow, constant trickle of Hillary's litany of issues, and also how he outmaneuvered a fractured Republican Party that came into a primary season without a consensus pick, which is not the norm. And he zigged when a lot of them zagged on a lot of things. He went against the more inclusive playbook their strategy said that they should run, and he won. And this also challenges the media narratives like how voter anger played a role or how being a political outsider was a big factor. And it does so pretty convincingly to the point where it made me question or reconsider reframing my thoughts on those talking points. And in the main, it's a fascinating examination of a larger theme because it is a watershed moment, a turning point in politics where hyperpartisanship combined with both candidates centering identity as one of their main campaign strategies, and the ramifications of that just have been massive. For the cons of this book, I would have liked more on how Trump's rhetoric on foreign policy impacted the vote because he was not towing the party line there. And in this, we only get a few mentions of him criticizing others for supporting the war in Iraq at the time. For a book so comprehensive in detailing what did and did not make a difference, like economic anxiety and his incendiary immigration reform policies, I feel like foreign policy should have been covered just as much. Like, I remember articles from the neocon warhawk Charles Krauthammer. He and others lambasted Trump for what Krauthammer called isolationism, which for neocons, isolationism is anything that isn't an 11 out of 10 regarding America's role as the police of the world, which is why it was crazy to me when I saw the Dems then and in 2024 courting neocons as this ineffective and ultimately self-immolating dunk on Trump. Anyway, I digress. Trump claimed that he wanted to avoid these foreign entanglements, and I would have loved to have seen the data behind how this impacted voters because non-interventionism was something that Republican voters were coming around to, and it probably resonated deeply with them. I mean, I feel like this would have had a similar impact as his populist framing around tax cuts, and we never really explored it in this. even if it was to demonstrate its overstated importance, maybe, if that was the case. And while racial issues were covered exhaustively and mostly effectively, I do have concerns about the over-reliance on the racial resentment scale, which at least once is leveraged to say that a person is symbolically racist simply for holding conservative viewpoints on political issues that, by their nature, include varying degrees of racial components. Because while the scale does capture attitudes towards race, it also muddles that picture with attitudes towards politics, the economy, and culture. And from what I understand, the term symbolically racist has been abandoned by those who still defend this scale in this field. This isn't to say that racism regarding those different political issues doesn't exist. It's quite the opposite. But it's, again, the over-reliance on the muddled methodology that I found suspect. Essentially, I wish there was a cleaner way to capture these attitudes that, and this may be reductive, but seem to range from legitimate concerns to persecution complexes to outright blind prejudice. But I recognize how difficult that can be, and I think the authors could have done a better job qualifying this data, but it does seem that they at least somewhat make this adjustment and were more careful with this scale in their book about the 2020 election. Anyway, that was a big digression. I did not mean to talk about this book all that much in politics in general, to be honest, because it's so hard to have those discussions online these days. I thought this was really solid. I gave it 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it if you want to know more about this election and the ramifications from it. Now, there's this trend that's been going around on social media lately that's like, here's my personal curriculum for X topic. And I've had my own for my recent obsession with the Titanic. If you want something to start with on that topic, then I would definitely recommend A Night to Remember, the classic account of the sinking of the Titanic by Walter Lord. This was written in 1955, and I will tell you, it holds up. And it is a thrilling and haunting ride that starts just as the iceberg is within view. And it's just go, go, go from there as Lord stitches together these eyewitness accounts to form this chronological minute-by-minute narrative. And you can take this sucker down in a weekend. It's fast-paced, under 170 pages, and it does so well to capture the emotion and turmoil and dramatic scenes. I did a book call recently where I was holding up On a Sea of Glass, which is another Titanic book, and I was talking about why this topic is so addictive to me, and it's because the Titanic story has everything. It has the highs and lows of the human condition in action, its technological advancements colliding with the immovable force of the natural world, reminding us that progress does have limits. It's this race against time and the snap decisions that people make, and they have to live with those decisions forever, or for some of them, those decisions like lead to their demise. But still, there are so many layers to it that go beyond a ship sinking, and over 1,000 people unfortunately losing their lives. And A Night to Remember does a wonderful job capturing this story. I gave it 4 stars, and that's probably too low as I can continue to reflect on my experiences with it. Either way, highly recommend this. This was awesome. I'm going to talk about these next 2 together because they're a duology, Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. And these are the brand new Dregs editions. Shout out to Macmillan Publishing for sending me these. And full disclosure, as I started reading Six of Crows, I was talking about how much I was enjoying it, and Macmillan reached out to do some business, and I did a paid promotion on TikTok with them for the release of these new editions. So this video is not part of that promotion. I am not being paid to praise this at this point, but I did want to point that out and be totally transparent with you. But yeah, this is a really straightforward yes recommendation from me. I love heists, especially fantasy heists, the tension, the ensemble cast, the interpersonal relationships, the creativity that goes into making these things work. And Six of Crows delivers on all of that. And Crooked Kingdom was a bit different from book 1 in that the pacing slows down a bit, and it puts more of a microscope on the characters, which, as somebody who loves a fast-paced heist and character-driven books, both angles really worked for me. And I think Bardugo was smart in her choice to change things up for Crooked Kingdom, and Crooked Kingdom did have probably like one of the best emotional scenes in the duology. If you know, you know. So I thought it all paid off really well. And random question for you. My favorite character was Nina. And I'm wondering if that's a popular pick or if I'm being super basic. So let me know in the comments who your favorite character is from this duology. Anyway, 4.5 for Six of Crows. That's flirting more with a 4.75 the more I think about it. 4.25 for Crooked Kingdom. Let's just call the composite rating 4.5 for the duology. I am pleased as punch that these lived up to the hype. I had 2 5-star reads this month, and I've talked a ton on my other channels about this one, and it was a reread for me with the History Sickos book club. I'm talking about Ghost on the Throne, The Death of Alexander the Great, and the Bloody Fight for His Empire by James Romm. I think the UK subtitle for this one is slightly different. I think it's Alexander the Great and the War for Crown and Empire. I'll keep this video, or I'll keep this review brief, because I did recommend this book in a video I did about how you can read about ancient Greek history in chronological order. So check that out if you want to know more. But this is essentially about the Wars of the Successors, or the Wars of the Diadochi, where these competing factions play crabs in a bucket after Alexander kicks the bucket. It's a complex history with a lot of moving parts, but Romm does a brilliant job. I can't overstate that enough. Brilliant job stitching it all together. This is one of my favorites, so check it out if you're interested at all in ancient Greece or Alexander the Great. There are so many fascinating figures from this violent period that you may not know about, so yeah, give this one a try. My other 5-star read was Gwangju Uprising, The Rebellion for Democracy in South Korea, by a trio of authors with personal connections to the wild events that went down in South Korea in 1980. And what went down was there were student-led demonstrations that took place in May of 1980, stemming from public anger regarding Chun Doo-won's authoritarian government enforcing martial law. Now, this book starts out with a wild scene that took place less than a year earlier, which was really the catalyst for all of this, because Chun Doo-won took power in a military coup d'etat codenamed Operation Birthday House Party. I am not joking. That is the real code name. So anyway, that coup happened after the assassination of President Park in October 1979. And this is one version of how that assassination went down. So President Park is having dinner with the director of the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, Kim Jae-gyu, and his chief bodyguard, Cha Ji-chul. And an argument breaks out between those two over the way that the regime has cracked down on recent demonstrations. Now, Cha was in full agreement with the strong military retaliation. Kim argued that displays of forceful oppression would not sustain the regime much longer. Cha went as far to respond that, quote, Pol Pot of Cambodia stayed in power after killing 2 million people. We could easily kill 1 million and retain our authority, end quote. Park sided with Cha on the matter. Kim judged that the regime had to be ended, took out a gun, shot Park and Cha dead on the spot. Now, that is straight from a movie. And again, I recognize that this is how Kim said it went down in his testimony, and he probably did make it seem as like high-minded as possible. And it leaves you wrestling with all the complicated moral questions that come from that action. And I think that's part of why Kim has this complicated legacy in South Korea. There's also several theories behind it, right? Like, was it that cut and dry? Was it the result of a power struggle where he was losing? Was the CIA involved? We still don't know. And all of it's still heavily debated. But reading this as an opener raised the hell out of my eyebrows. And I recommend the film The Man Standing Next, which has its own take on these events. But back to Gwangju Uprising. I did a larger write-up about these events on Bindery, but the nuts and bolts of it are that students have these protests in Gwangju. The government goes way over the top in cracking down on it. Other regular citizens see this brutality and they decide to join the cause. So now you have these skirmishes and battles and violence between civilians and government forces. And this is a scholarly breakdown of just about everything that went down. And this was written so that South Koreans would remember the truth of these events, because there are still hardline conservatives to this day that use misinformation and propaganda to distort it, despite all of the evidence that has come to light. And look, this is what happens when government mistakes dissent for insurrection and decides that its citizens are enemies rather than voices to be heard. Then you've got the government deploying security forces against local populations, and bad things happen from there. Anyway, this is a scholarly yet gripping and haunting work. It's so well researched, so comprehensive, and very graphic. I think it's a necessary read. Again, 5 stars. absolutely enthralling. And even as a limited print translated pricier book, it is worth the price tag. Pick it up. I'm so glad that I did. So that is 8 books, 8 reviews. I appreciate y'all hanging out with me for this one. Again, I want to know the best book that you read in September in the comments. Check out all my other efforts. My link tree is in the description and also on my profile. So please check out the bindery. Got really exciting stuff happening with the publishing imprint. Anyway, thanks for hanging out for this entire thing. I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you on the next one.